The submarine officers at Naval Base Kitsap thought they knew exactly who Isabella Rodriguez was. For 14 months, she had been the invisible cook who prepared their meals in the classified dining facility with methodical precision. With her stunning blonde hair pulled back in regulation style, beneath her white chef's hat, and her piercing gray eyes that seemed to notice everything while revealing nothing, she moved through the galley like a ghost, present but unremarkable, efficient but forgettable. Captain Marcus Steele barely acknowledged her existence as she served his morning coffee in the senior officers' dining area. The submarine commander was focused on classified briefings spread across his table, discussing the upcoming Operation Deep Strike with his executive officer. Around them, the stainless steel surfaces of the submarine-based dining facility reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting that cast sharp shadows across their faces. "The reactor stress tests are scheduled for 0800 hours, Captain Steele said to Commander Hayes, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "All nuclear protocols must be verified before we submerge." Isabella moved silently between tables, refilling coffee cups and clearing breakfast plates. Her hands worked with practiced efficiency, but her gray eyes tracked every conversation, every document briefly visible, every security protocol casually discussed. She had perfected the art of being invisible, a skill that had served her well during her 14-month assignment. Lieutenant Commander Brooks glanced up from his tablet as she approached with fresh coffee. "Thanks, Rodriguez," he said absently, already turning back to his conversation about missile guidance systems. To him she was simply part of the background, as unremarkable as the stainless steel fixtures that surrounded them. The morning routine continued with clockwork precision. Officers arrived, ate their meals, discussed classified operations, and departed for their duties aboard the various nuclear submarines docked at the facility. Isabella served them all with the same quiet efficiency, her presence so consistently unremarkable that she had become virtually invisible to the most security-conscious personnel in the Navy. "Isabella, Table 6 needs their order taken," called Chief Petty Officer Martinez from behind the service counter. The senior enlisted man who supervised the dining facility operations treated her with professional courtesy, but like the others, he saw only what she allowed him to see, a competent cook who kept her head down and did her job without complaint. Isabella nodded and moved toward Table 6, where 3 submarine officers were deep in discussion about reactor coolant systems. As she approached, their conversation continued uninterrupted, treating her presence as they would any other piece of kitchen equipment. "The new cooling protocols require manual override capability," one officer was saying. "If the automated systems fail during emergency ascent, someone needs to be able to input the manual codes." Isabella made notes on her order pad, but her trained mind cataloged the technical details being discussed. These conversations, seemingly casual to the participants, formed patterns that revealed operational vulnerabilities she had been sent to identify. Each detail was another piece in a puzzle she had been assembling for over a year. Captain Steele's voice carried across the dining room as he briefed 2 visiting admirals. "Our nuclear submarine fleet represents the most sophisticated underwater weapons platform ever deployed. The security protocols surrounding our reactor technology are impenetrable." Isabella finished taking orders at Table 6 and returned to the kitchen, where she began preparing meals with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else. But behind her unremarkable exterior, she processed the captain's confident assertion about impenetrable security, knowing from her observations that several critical vulnerabilities existed in their protocols. The galley operated like a well-oiled machine during the breakfast rush. Isabella worked alongside 3 other civilian contractors, all of whom had been thoroughly vetted by Navy security. None of them knew that the quiet blonde woman chopping vegetables beside them possessed security clearances that exceeded those of most officers in the dining room. "Rodriguez, you're on serving duty for the senior officers' lunch," Chief Martinez announced. "Admiral Patterson will be joining Captain Steele for a classified briefing, extra attention to detail." Isabella acknowledged the assignment with a simple nod. Admiral Patterson's visits always involved discussions of the highest classification levels, exactly the kind of intelligence-gathering opportunity she had been positioned to exploit. For 14 months she had been building a comprehensive profile of security vulnerabilities in the submarine fleet's most sensitive operations. As the breakfast service concluded and the dining facility entered its brief lull before lunch preparations, Isabella cleaned her workstation with the same attention to detail she applied to every task. Around her, The other kitchen staff gossiped about upcoming shore leave and weekend plans, normal conversations that reinforced her carefully constructed cover identity. Chief Martinez approached her station, reviewing the lunch menu. "The admiral specifically requested the grilled salmon," he said. "Make sure it's prepared exactly according to his preferences." Isabella had been preparing Admiral Patterson's meals for over a year. She knew his dietary preferences, his regular schedule, and most importantly, the types of classified discussions that occurred during his visits. Each meal service provided another opportunity to observe and document the security protocols that govern the submarine fleet's most critical operations. The lunch preparation began at 10:30 hours. Isabella worked with practiced efficiency, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind processed the morning's intelligence collection. The reactor stress test schedules, the manual override protocols, the security vulnerabilities she had identified, all of it formed a comprehensive picture of the submarine fleet's operational readiness and potential weaknesses. At 11:45 hours, Admiral Patterson arrived for his classified lunch meeting with Captain Steele. Isabella watched from the kitchen as the two senior officers took their seats in the secure section of the dining facility, their conversation immediately shifting to topics that required the highest levels of security clearance. She moved through the dining room with practiced invisibility, serving other tables while positioning herself to observe the Admiral's meeting. The conversations around her provided a constant stream of intelligence about submarine operations, reactor protocols, and security procedures that most of the participants assumed were protected by the facility's classification levels. The new nuclear protocols require verification codes that only 3 people possess, she overheard Captain Steele telling Admiral Patterson. If those codes are compromised, the entire submarine fleet becomes vulnerable. Isabella refilled water glasses at nearby tables, her movements casual and unremarkable, while she processed the critical intelligence being discussed. The verification codes Captain Steele referenced were exactly the type of information she had been sent to identify and assess for vulnerabilities. At 1200 hours, she served lunch to Admiral Patterson and Captain Steele, placing their meals with the same quiet efficiency she had demonstrated for 14 months. Neither officer acknowledged her presence beyond a brief nod, their conversation continuing as if she were simply another piece of kitchen equipment. "The reactor emergency protocols concern me," Admiral Patterson was saying as Isabella arranged his silverware. "If we lose primary coolant during a deep dive, the manual override systems become our only fail-safe." Isabella moved away from their table, but her trained memory had already cataloged every detail of their conversation. The emergency protocols, the manual override systems, the potential failure modes, all of it represented intelligence of the highest value for anyone seeking to understand the submarine fleet's vulnerabilities. The lunch service continued with the same routine efficiency that characterized all of Isabella's work. Officers came and went, classified conversations rose and fell around her, and she remained invisible while gathering intelligence that painted a comprehensive picture of the submarine fleet's operational security. At 13:30 hours, an urgent announcement crackled over the facility's public address system. "All personnel report to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The dining facility erupted into controlled chaos as officers abandoned their meals and rushed toward their emergency assignments. Isabella watched from behind the service counter as the most senior submarine commanders in the Pacific Fleet mobilized for what appeared to be a genuine crisis. Captain Steele's voice cut through the noise as he coordinated with his officers. "All submarine commanders to the command center immediately. We have a potential reactor emergency aboard the USS Leviathan." Isabella felt her pulse quicken as she heard the name of the submarine. The USS Leviathan was a Virginia-class attack submarine that represented the pinnacle of naval nuclear technology. Any reactor emergency aboard that vessel would threaten not just the crew, but potentially the entire submarine base if the situation escalated beyond containment protocols. Chief Martinez appeared beside her, his face grim. "Kitchen staff are to remain at stations until further notice," he said. "Emergency protocols require all civilian personnel to maintain positions until the situation is resolved." Isabella nodded, but her mind was already processing the implications of the crisis. 14 months of intelligence gathering had given her intimate knowledge of the submarine fleet's emergency procedures, and she understood better than most civilian personnel just how serious a reactor emergency could become. Through the dining facility's reinforced windows, she could see submarine personnel moving with urgent purpose across the base. Emergency vehicles raced between buildings, their flashing lights reflecting off the gray steel surfaces of the docked submarines. The USS Leviathan sat at Pier 7, its hull surrounded by emergency response teams working to contain whatever crisis had developed aboard the vessel. The public address system crackled again with an update. All personnel with nuclear emergency training report to Command Center Alpha immediately. Reactor coolant systems aboard USS Leviathan have failed. Manual override protocols are in effect. Isabella's training kicked in as she heard the specific terminology being used. Reactor coolant failure represented one of the most dangerous scenarios possible aboard a nuclear submarine. If the manual override systems failed, the reactor could overheat beyond containment, threatening not just the submarine but potentially triggering a nuclear emergency that could contaminate the entire base. Captain Steele's voice echoed from the command center, his words carrying clearly through the facility's emergency communication system. "We need someone who understands the S9G reactor manual override protocols. The automated systems are completely unresponsive." Isabella felt a chill of recognition. The S9G reactor was the advanced nuclear propulsion system that powered the Virginia-class submarines. She had studied those systems extensively during her previous assignment, before her current deep cover mission began. The manual override protocols were incredibly complex, requiring intimate knowledge of nuclear engineering principles that few personnel possessed. "Where's Chief Nuclear Engineer Thompson?" Captain Steele's voice demanded over the communications system. "We need his expertise immediately." The response came back immediately, tinged with desperation. "Sir, Chief Thompson is in surgery following yesterday's accident. He's unavailable for at least 48 hours. We're trying to locate other personnel with S9G reactor expertise." Isabella realized with growing alarm that the base might not have anyone immediately available with the specific technical knowledge needed to resolve the crisis. The S9G reactor systems were so advanced that only a handful of personnel possessed the training necessary to perform manual overrides during emergency situations. Chief Martinez appeared again, his face showing the stress of the developing emergency. "All kitchen staff are to remain calm," he announced, though his own voice betrayed his concern. "The situation is being handled by qualified personnel." But Isabella knew from her extensive intelligence gathering that the base's qualified nuclear personnel were either unavailable or already committed to other emergency duties. The USS Leviathan's crew was trapped aboard a submarine with a failing reactor, and the manual override systems required expertise that might not be immediately accessible. The emergency continued to escalate over the next 30 minutes. Isabella listened to the communications traffic, her training allowing her to understand the technical details that most civilian personnel would find incomprehensible. The reactor coolant systems had failed catastrophically, the automated backup systems were unresponsive, and the manual override protocols required someone with intimate knowledge of nuclear submarine reactor design. At 1:40 hours, the situation reached a critical point. Captain Steele's voice over the emergency communications carried a note of barely controlled panic. "We have 15 minutes before reactor temperature reaches critical thresholds. If we cannot engage manual cooling protocols, we'll have to evacuate the base." Isabella understood the implications better than anyone else in the dining facility. Base evacuation would mean abandoning not just the USS Leviathan, but potentially contaminating one of the Navy's most important submarine facilities. The environmental and strategic consequences would be catastrophic. She made a decision that would end her 14-month deep cover mission. Moving with sudden purpose, Isabella walked toward the emergency communication station in the dining facility. Her movements caught Chief Martinez's attention, who watched with confusion as the quiet cook approached equipment that civilian personnel were not authorized to access. "Rodriguez, what are you doing?" Martinez called out, moving to intercept her. Isabel paused at the communication station, her hand reaching toward the transmit button. For 14 months she had maintained perfect cover, gathering intelligence while remaining invisible to even the most security-conscious personnel. But now maintaining that cover would mean allowing a nuclear emergency to escalate beyond containment. She reached into her chef's hat and withdrew a small metallic object that had been concealed there for over a year. The nuclear submarine warfare badge caught the fluorescent light as it fell from her fingers, hitting the stainless steel floor with a distinctive metallic sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet dining facility. Chief Martinez froze, his eyes fixed on the badge that no civilian contractor should possess. The submarine warfare insignia represented qualification in nuclear submarine operations, a designation that required years of specialized training and security clearances of the highest level. Isabella activated the communication system with practiced efficiency, her voice carrying authority that had been hidden for 14 months. "Command Center Alpha, this is Director Rodriguez, authorization code Shadow 77 Alpha. I have S9G reactor emergency override capability." The response was immediate, Captain Steele's voice sharp with surprise and hope. "Director Rodriguez, identify yourself and confirm authorization." Isabella's training took over completely. "Captain,
I am Director Isabella Rodriguez, Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program, operating under Classified Assignment Authority. I possess current certification for S9G reactor emergency protocols. I can perform manual coolant system override. Chief Martinez stared at her in shock. His understanding of everything he thought he knew about the quiet cook completely shattered. Around the dining facility, other civilian staff and remaining officers watched in stunned silence as the woman they had considered invisible for over a year revealed capabilities none of them had suspected.
Director Rodriguez, your authorization is confirmed, Captain Steele's voice responded. Report to USS Leviathan immediately. Emergency escort is being dispatched. Isabella removed her chef's hat completely, revealing her blonde hair freed from its regulation constraints. Her posture shifted from the unassuming demeanor she had maintained for 14 months to the confident bearing of someone accustomed to handling nuclear emergencies of the highest complexity. Chief Martinez found his voice. Isabella, Director Rodriguez, I don't understand. She turned to face him, and for the first time in their 14 months of working together, he saw her true identity reflected in her piercing gray eyes. Chief, I've been conducting a classified security assessment of submarine fleet protocols. My background is nuclear engineering, specialized in reactor emergency procedures. The dining facility's doors burst open as emergency personnel arrived to escort her to the USS Leviathan. 2 submarine officers, both wearing the insignia of nuclear-trained personnel, approached with expressions that mixed relief and curiosity. Director Rodriguez, the senior officer asked. Lieutenant Commander Wells, Nuclear Engineering. We've been briefed on your qualifications. The situation aboard Leviathan is critical. Isabella nodded, her mind already shifting completely from her cover identity to the technical challenges awaiting her. What's the current reactor temperature? Approaching critical thresholds, estimated 12 minutes before we lose containment capability. As they moved toward the exit, Isabella paused to address Chief Martinez one final time. Chief, my assignment here was classified at the highest levels. The kitchen staff were never meant to know my true purpose. Martinez nodded slowly, still processing the revelation. 14 months, he said quietly. You were watching everything. I was protecting everything, she corrected. Just like I'm about to do now. Isabella followed the escort team toward the USS Leviathan. Her 14-month deep cover mission officially concluded. Behind her, the dining facility remained in stunned silence as the kitchen staff tried to comprehend how the quiet cook who had worked beside them had possessed capabilities none of them had ever suspected. The emergency escort moved quickly through the submarine base, their path cleared by security personnel who had been briefed on the developing crisis. Isabella's mind focused completely on the technical challenges ahead, drawing on nuclear engineering knowledge that had been concealed behind her cover identity for over a year. Director, the reactor coolant system failure appears to be cascading, Lieutenant Commander Wells explained as they approached the submarine. Primary cooling loop is completely offline, secondary systems are unresponsive, and automated emergency protocols have failed to engage. Isabella processed the technical details, her training allowing her to visualize the complex systems aboard the Virginia-class submarine. What about the tertiary cooling systems? Manual activation required, but the override codes aren't responding to standard inputs. They reached the USS Leviathan, where emergency personnel had established a command perimeter around the submarine. Captain Steele stood at the center of the operation, coordinating with nuclear emergency specialists while maintaining communication with the trapped crew aboard the vessel. When he saw Isabella approaching, his expression showed both relief and curiosity. For 14 months she had served his meals without either of them realizing her true qualifications. Now she represented his best hope for resolving a nuclear emergency that threatened the entire base. Director Rodriguez, Captain Steele said, his voice carrying the weight of command authority mixed with genuine gratitude. Thank you for stepping forward. Isabella nodded, her focus entirely on the technical crisis. Captain, I need immediate access to the reactor compartment and authorization to input manual override codes. Granted. Whatever you need. Isabella followed the technical escort team aboard the USS Leviathan, moving through the submarine's narrow corridors toward the reactor compartment. The familiar environment brought back memories of her previous assignment, when she had been openly identified as a nuclear engineering specialist rather than maintaining the deep cover that had defined the past 14 months. The reactor compartment was filled with emergency personnel working frantically to resolve the cooling system crisis. Temperature indicators showed dangerously elevated readings, while automated systems displayed error messages that confirmed the severity of the technical failures. Isabella approached the manual override console, her hands moving with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with S9G reactor systems. The complex array of controls and displays held no mysteries for her, each component representing years of specialized training that had been hidden during her cover assignment. "Current reactor temperature?" she asked the senior technician monitoring the emergency systems. 812 degrees and climbing. "Critical threshold is 850. Isabella's fingers moved across the manual override controls with practiced precision. The system required a complex sequence of inputs that had to be executed in precise order, with timing that allowed no margin for error. A single mistake could trigger automatic safety protocols that would shut down the reactor permanently, effectively ending the submarine's operational capability. "Beginning manual coolant system activation," she announced, her voice calm despite the critical nature of the procedure. The first sequence of override codes activated auxiliary cooling pumps that had been offline since the initial system failure. Indicators showed immediate response as coolant began flowing through secondary distribution channels, but the reactor temperature continued climbing toward critical levels. Isabella moved to the next phase of the manual override, inputting authorization codes that only a handful of personnel possessed. The system processed her inputs for several seconds, warning indicators flashing as automated safety systems evaluated the manual interventions. "Temperature stabilizing at 820 degrees, reported the monitoring technician, relief evident in his voice. But Isabella knew the crisis wasn't resolved. The temporary cooling would buy time, but permanent restoration of the coolant systems required more complex interventions that would test the limits of her technical expertise. "Phase 2 manual override protocols," she announced, her hands moving to a different section of the control panel. The second phase required reprogramming the automated cooling distribution systems, a procedure that involved temporarily overriding safety protocols while maintaining precise control over nuclear reaction rates. Isabella's training had prepared her for exactly this type of emergency, but the practical execution demanded absolute precision under extreme pressure. As she worked, Isabella became aware that her actions were being observed not just by the submarine's crew, but by senior officers who had known her only as a dining facility cook. The transformation from invisible food service worker to critical nuclear emergency specialist represented a revelation that challenged everything they thought they understood about personnel security and cover operations. "Director, we're showing positive response across all cooling systems," reported Lieutenant Commander Wells, reactor temperature dropping to safe operational levels. Isabella continued working through the manual override procedures, her focus unwavering despite the attention her actions had drawn. Each input had to be precisely timed and executed, with no allowance for the kind of mistakes that 14 months of maintaining cover had trained her to avoid. The final phase of the emergency procedure required reactivating the submarine's primary cooling systems, while gradually transferring control back to automated protocols. Isabella's hands moved with mechanical precision across the control interfaces, her training and experience converging in the successful resolution of a crisis that could have had catastrophic consequences. At 14:47 hours, the reactor temperature stabilized at normal operational levels. All cooling systems showed green status indicators, and the USS Leviathan's nuclear propulsion plant returned to safe configuration. The emergency that had threatened the entire submarine base was resolved through manual intervention that only Isabella possessed the qualifications to perform. Captain Steele's voice echoed through the submarine's communication system. "All stations, this is the captain. The reactor emergency has been resolved. Secure from emergency stations." Isabella stepped back from the control console, her 14-month cover mission permanently concluded, but her primary objective successfully accomplished. The nuclear emergency had required her to reveal capabilities that no simple dining facility cook could possess, ending her invisibility but protecting the submarine base from potential catastrophe. As the immediate crisis passed, Isabella found herself surrounded by submarine personnel whose respect was evident in their expressions. For 14 months she had been invisible to most of them, serving their meals and cleaning their tables while possessing qualifications that exceeded many of their own. Lieutenant Commander Wells approached her as the reactor compartment returned to normal operations. "Director, that was extraordinary work. How long have you been qualified on S9G reactor systems?" Isabella considered her response carefully. "My nuclear engineering background spans several years, including specialized training in emergency protocols. This assignment required those qualifications to remain classified." Captain Steele entered the reactor compartment, his expression showing a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "Director Rodriguez, I believe we need to discuss your assignment aboard this base." Isabella nodded, understanding that her cover was permanently compromised but her mission successfully completed. "Captain, I was conducting a 14-month security assessment of submarine fleet protocols. Today's emergency demonstrated both the vulnerabilities and the safeguards that exist within our operations." The next several hours were spent in detailed debriefing sessions, as Isabella provided comprehensive analysis of the security vulnerabilities she had identified during her cover assignment.
Her observations about communication protocols, personnel security awareness, and operational vulnerabilities formed a detailed assessment that would reshape submarine fleet security procedures. Admiral Patterson, who had been having lunch in the dining facility when the emergency began, participated in the debriefing with keen interest. "Director, your assessment of our security protocols will be invaluable. How many personnel were aware of your true assignment?" "Minimal essential personnel only, sir. The cover operation required complete compartmentalization to be effective." Isabella's report detailed numerous instances where classified information had been discussed casually in her presence, security protocols that had been overlooked, and operational details that had been revealed through the assumption that dining facility personnel posed no intelligence-gathering threat. "The reactor emergency," Admiral Patterson observed, "required you to reveal capabilities that immediately compromised your cover. What was your assessment of the risk versus benefit?" Isabella had prepared for this question during the months of planning her assignment. "Sir, the primary mission was intelligence gathering, but the fundamental purpose was protecting submarine fleet operations. When the emergency required technical intervention that only I could provide, the choice was clear." Over the following days, Isabella's assessment report became the foundation for comprehensive updates to submarine fleet security protocols. Her 14 months of invisible observation had identified vulnerabilities that conventional security reviews had missed, providing insights that could only be gained through sustained covert observation. Chief Martinez requested a personal meeting with Isabella before her departure from the base. They met in the same dining facility where she had maintained her cover for 14 months, but now their conversation occurred with complete honesty about her true identity and mission. 14 months, Martinez said, still processing the revelation. "You prepared our meals, cleaned our tables, listened to our conversations. What did you think of us?" Isabella considered the question carefully. "Chief, I observed dedicated personnel performing critical missions under demanding circumstances. The security vulnerabilities I identified weren't the result of negligence, but of human nature in familiar environments." Martinez nodded slowly. "Will there be others, other people like you, watching and assessing?" Isabella smiled slightly, the first genuine expression of warmth she had allowed herself during their entire working relationship. "Chief, effective security depends on multiple layers of protection, some visible, some invisible." Her departure from Naval Base Kitsap occurred with the same lack of fanfare that had characterized her arrival 14 months earlier. Isabella Rodriguez, the invisible dining facility cook, simply disappeared one morning, replaced by Isabella Rodriguez, nuclear engineering director, whose classified report would influence submarine fleet security protocols for years to come. The dining facility resumed normal operations, but the kitchen staff found themselves viewing their work environment with new awareness. The quiet efficiency that had once seemed unremarkable now carried the possibility that any of their colleagues might possess capabilities and purposes that extended far beyond food service. Captain Steele implemented Isabella's security recommendations immediately, establishing new protocols for classified discussion in common areas, enhanced personnel security awareness training, and procedures for identifying and protecting against covert observation operations conducted by hostile intelligence services. 6 months after Isabella's departure, Admiral Patterson received a classified briefing on submarine fleet security improvements that had resulted from her assessment. The number of security vulnerabilities identified and corrected through her recommendations had exceeded all previous security reviews, demonstrating the value of sustained covert observation by qualified personnel. The director's assessment, Admiral Patterson noted in his confidential report to Navy leadership, identified security gaps that conventional reviews could not detect. Her technical intervention during the reactor emergency saved not just the USS Leviathan, but potentially the entire submarine base from nuclear contamination. Isabella's next assignment took her to a different military installation, where she would again assume an invisible role while conducting security assessments that could only be accomplished through sustained covert observation. Her identity would change, her cover would be different, but her mission would remain the same, protecting critical military operations by identifying and addressing vulnerabilities that conventional security could not detect. The USS Leviathan returned to operational status with enhanced reactor safety protocols based on the emergency procedures Isabella had implemented. The manual override system she had activated became the standard for Virginia-class submarines, providing additional layers of protection against the type of catastrophic failure that had nearly resulted in nuclear emergency. Chief Martinez never again viewed dining facility personnel with simple assumptions about their backgrounds or capabilities. Isabella's revelation had demonstrated that effective security often required the most qualified personnel to appear completely ordinary, invisible guardians whose true purpose remained hidden until the moment their expertise became critical for mission success. Years later, when junior officers asked about the legendary cook who had saved the submarine base, the story had taken on mythical qualities in its retelling. But those who had been present during the reactor emergency understood the essential truth. The most effective protectors often moved invisibly through the world, their true capabilities hidden behind carefully maintained covers until the moment when someone needed to step forward and input the codes that only they possessed. The nuclear submarine warfare badge that had fallen from Isabella's chef hat was eventually framed and displayed in the base command center, a reminder that critical expertise could be found in the most unexpected places. Below it, a small plaque bore a simple inscription: In recognition of those who serve in silence until duty demands they step into the light, Isabella Rodriguez had completed her mission successfully, protecting submarine fleet operations while gathering intelligence that would enhance security for years to come. Her 14 months of invisible service had culminated in preventing a nuclear emergency and providing security assessments that conventional reviews could never accomplish. She had proven that the most effective guardians were often those who asked for no recognition, carrying their expertise silently until the moment when their knowledge became essential for protecting those they had been sent to serve.